The next session is mainly for the technology geeks. The title is The Great Tech Game, and we are delighted to have Anirudh Suri ji in conversation with T K Arun ji. मैं चाहूंगा पास में प्लीज क्लियर कर दिया जाए एंड please stay seated for the next session titled as the Great Tech Game. So we have the two gentlemen here for the next session. I would request them to please take their places on the dais. We are extremely delighted to have with us Anirudh Suri ji, and he is going to be in conversation with T K Arun ji. मैं चाहूँगा दोनों का तालियों से हम स्वागत करें please. Anirudh Suri ji is a venture capitalist, technology entrepreneur, policy advisor and an author. He is currently the managing partner at India Internet Fund, a technology-focused venture capital fund based in India and the US. Previously, he has worked with the government of India in Delhi, McKinsey and more. He is also the author of The Great Tech Game, which was published in 2022. He has written extensively on foreign policies, geopolitics, national security, technology and entrepreneurship, and he has served as the director on the board of the Harvard Alumni Association. So we are extremely happy to have you with us. Please welcome him with a round of applause, everyone. As the discussant for the day, for this session, we are delighted to have Mr. T K Arun ji with us. He is a Delhi-based journalist and columnist. He writes extensively on a range of subjects overlapping with political economy. He has also been the resident editor of the Economic Times at Delhi. He has headed the Economic Bureau and looked after the editorial page of the paper in the past. He had been with the paper since 1994, except for a 2.5-year stint with the .com world till contractual disengagement at the end of 2021. It's a pleasure for us to have you at this dais, and we are really looking forward to hearing from both of you. जोरदार तालियों से हम उनका अभिनंदन करते हैं and निवेदन करते हैं कि conversation शुरू की जाए please.
Thank you. We are going to discuss a book that is very unique in some respects. It seeks to combine technology with geopolitics. Thanks to the Ukraine war, a lot of people who would not otherwise be acquainted with the intricacies of geopolitics right now take note and understand why India is now playing a very special role in the world in balancing the interests of the United States, its own interests, that of Ukraine, and playing a very delicate game vis-a-vis Russia, China and the US. And the way technology can play a decisive role in how countries are able to mobilize their strategic strength and project strength has been demonstrated by the US decision to ban key technology exports to China. And this is impede China's ability to develop its ongoing progress into a superpower in artificial intelligence. At least it will not stop it, but it might actually impede. Now, Anirudh Suri has examined this extensively before these current developments, although he wrote it only in 2022, and he has a very clear view on what a country like India should do to play its part in the world, what it should do with technology. Before that, would you please outline your perspective on why technology is become so important in today's world?
Thank you, Mr. Arun, and thank you to the organizers, obviously, of the Bhopal Literary Festival, and Raghav Chandra ji, who has kindly invited me to be here. It's a pleasure to be here. So, Mr. Arun, your question around India's piece I'll come to, but as you've requested, I'll briefly outline why I feel that technology's implications for our world are important for us to understand. The first section of my book actually places what's happening today in terms of how technology is shaping the geopolitics of our world and the economic destinies of nations. I've tried to place the phenomenon that we all currently living through in a longer historical context, so that we can understand the gravity of what is happening today. One of the first few examples I start off in the book with is how when the Gutenberg press came about in Europe, almost 500, 600 years ago, people who were living at that time could not quite grasp at that time what the societal, economic, geopolitical, religious implications of that one technology or the printing press would have been. And I use that example to say that today, the kind of ramifications that technology is having are often equal, if not greater magnitude. And I place today's era, I call it the great tech game, but I've also spoken about some of the earlier games, great games that have happened in human history. So I talk about the advent of agriculture, for example, as a great game. People at that time, civilizations or river-based civilizations that time, that understood how to basically master agricultural technology at the time, which revolved, let's say, around irrigation technology, became richer, more prosperous regions and were the winners economically of that time. Similarly, you can go into more recent history and look at industrialization, the great industrialization game, or what I call the great colonization game, where countries that mastered that game ended up being the winners of that era. India, unfortunately, has missed many of these recent great games. We have not been winners in these great games. Going back to agriculture, yes, maybe we were, but not necessarily in the more recent great games. And I argue that unless we understand that today we are in a similar kind of historically transformative era, where technology is shaping the economic destiny of nations, it's shaping the geopolitics of our world, the world order, the ranking of nations, the relations between nations, and at the same time it's transforming society, much like industrialization did, as we moved from artisanal, village-based societies to more urban agglomerations and industrial towns, and that changed our values, our family values, the structure of our families, etc. In this similar vein is what's going on today. Our societies are also changing, not just the geopolitics of our world. Our family values are changing. I think many of you who have children will know that children are now more hooked onto technology than any relatives of theirs that might be visiting. And families are, as a result, the values are also changing. So that's really what I've tried to outline in the book. One, I have said that it's very important for all of us in India to understand this, because often, unfortunately, because of colonialism or other such global developments, we have become very obsessed with what's happening in India and sometimes fail to place what's happening in India in the larger global context. And so that's why I've tried to provide a global context for how technology is shaping our world, not just India. And then I move deeper into what India can do in order to do well in this great tech game, and what we as individuals can do as well.
There are certain aspects of our recent history that we don't really give great credit for or take into account properly. India is a poor little backward country in many ways. But in terms of the ability to absorb technology and utilize it for national progress, India is actually at the cutting edge in various ways. India had a nuclear program when very few countries had a nuclear program. India initiated a space program when very few countries could dream of having a space program. India set up IITs to train a pool of talent of the highest quality who would be able to build the technological infrastructure nation building required at the time. All this has come into fruition to make India what it is today, more ready than most countries of the world to take the next step in technology. Another thing that we fail to appreciate is the 2008 Indo-US nuclear deal. Having conducted nuclear tests in the past in 1974 and in 1998, India had been put under severe sanctions by the rich countries of the world. These sanctions meant that India was placed in a technology denial regime. India could not access sensitive technologies that had implications for missiles, various chemicals that could be potentially used for chemical warfare, other dual-use technologies, and as well as nuclear technologies. By signing that India-US nuclear deal, India obtained release from the technology denial regime. And this is something very few in the country at large appreciated, very few in the political class appreciated. Those who rule this country today vehemently oppose the Indo-US nuclear deal in 2008. They even tried to bring the government down. It is a credit to that then Prime Minister, who otherwise did not show much courage or conviction on many things, stood his ground and got his government to support him in defending the deal and then defending the government or obtaining a majority. So these two played a very crucial role in allowing India to be a member of different technology arrangements in the world, such as the Wassenaar arrangement, the missile technology control regime, the Australia group, which now makes India in a position to access the finest in technology. But still that doesn't mean that we are anywhere near where other countries are. In quantum computing and quantum communications, China is perhaps almost ahead of the US. In artificial intelligence, China is just only next to the US. In terms of quantity, perhaps they are ahead. India has the capacity to match any country in all these areas. But are we ready to do this? And how crucial is it that India should do this?
So I think how crucial it is, I don't think we can overemphasize that. I think it's absolutely critical that we win. And when I say we win, I mean be in the top 2-3 tech nations of the world. It's absolutely critical. We don't want 100 years from now, generations that come after us, look back at history, at this point in history, and say that the people who were the entrepreneurs of this country, the political leaders of this country, the bureaucrats and the civil servants of this, the business leaders, that they didn't understand what was going on. Right? It's absolutely critical. Sometimes, as a young teenager, even as a college student, I used to look back at the colonial era history and often wonder why India was not able to resist the empires of the West, right? And what I want to make sure in some ways by writing this book is that 100 years from now, those generations don't look back today and say, these guys again didn't get it, right? And they didn't play the right game. So it's absolutely critical because this will determine the economic destiny of our country, much like colonialization and industrialization did. What India should do, I think as you rightly pointed out, we have some of the foundation in place. We have great centers of teaching and technology excellence, the IITs of the world. We have a great talent base today in the country who's equipped to be leaders in the technology world, both from the top. You can talk about the Sundar Pichais and the Satya Nadellas of the world, but even the middle layer, and I would say also the bottom layer in this whole technology talent hierarchy in a way. Today we are fortunate that the capital constraints that Indian entrepreneurs or Indian businesses maybe used to face 20-30 years ago, until 20-30 years ago, that capital constraint has also now been removed to a large extent. Now foreign capital is flowing, domestic capital is being unlocked to support entrepreneurship and especially technology entrepreneurship. So we have some of these pieces there for sure. The other piece that you rightly mentioned is that today geopolitically India is in a very advantageous position, which it might not have been during the Cold War era. It definitely was not when we were colonial subjects. Today, however, we are a nation that's on the up and rise. We have several countries of Europe, obviously the Americas, that want India to be a crucial partner with them. So I think these are some of the pieces that I would say are working well. Talent, capital, and I would say global partnerships. Where I think we are still lacking, and I will focus more on this because I don't want us to pat ourselves on the back too much before we actually get somewhere. Right? We only have the foundation today. We are not actually in the top 2-3 nations, tech nations of the world today. We are not. No matter how many unicorns we might have in this country, the startup ecosystem, I always like to highlight that ultimately what matters is how much wealth is being created by companies. And if you total up the profits of 100+ unicorns in India, they will not total up in aggregate to even the profits of one big tech firm in the US or China. Right? So we have to keep in mind that there's a long way to go still. And I think what the two pieces that we are still lacking are, one is ownership of technology. So I think, as you alluded to, whether we talked about the nuclear agreement or others, India has been denied technology, and India has also not been at the cutting edge of developing technology. We have often been adopters of technology that has been built in the West, typically in more recent times. And I think that's something that is still lacking to a large extent. We are not doing enough R&D in this country. Research and development spend in India today is 0.6 to 0.7% of our GDP spend. You compare that to a country like Taiwan or a country like Korea. These countries are great examples of countries that were poor 50, 60 years ago, but today are at the cutting edge of technology. Taiwan, obviously, as many of us know now, is one of the leaders in the semiconductor industry, which is at the core of today's tech wars also. How did they do that? How did these countries do that? One of the key ways they did that was they invested heavy amounts into R&D. India today, the 0.6% of our GDP that gets spent in R&D is largely in the pharma sector and to some extent in the auto sector. Pretty much minimal amounts in the tech sector, minimal amounts in the biotech sector, minimal amounts in quantum, artificial intelligence, and so forth. And I think that's one thing that really needs to change. The second thing that I believe we are missing is a strategy. It's very important for us to be clear that this great tech game that I have described in the book is a global game. And much like corporates have to have a strategy to find their own niche in any kind of value chain, India, like any other country in this great tech game, has to know what its strategy in this great tech game is. What is our space or place in this ecosystem going to be? Are we going to remain a services-led IT services player and a talent nation that provides talent to the foreign companies of the world? Or do we want to go one step further and become a critical part of the tech ecosystem where we are developing technology that then other companies are taking from us, buying from us, etc. Right? Can we build the next operating systems of the world? So if Google today makes a lot of money by virtue of developing the search engine that everyone then leverages, or the Android operating system that then multiple apps get built off, can UPI, Aadhaar, our digital public infrastructure be seen as a digital operating system for the world, on top of which various apps could be built? Right? So I think it's things like this that need to form the core of the Indian strategy, and that combined with some of the other pieces that I mentioned, capital, talent, technology, R&D, I think that can then be the formula for India to win.
Yeah. You say in your book this, that the use of digital public infrastructure in India is something that is ahead of the world, rest of the world.
Yes.
Our CoWIN app for vaccination, this is better than what anybody has had anywhere else in the country. We developed something called India Stack. When they see, that's a very expansive term. Based on Aadhaar, led by Nandan Nilekani, a set of people developed a clutch of application programming interfaces, which could be used to leverage Aadhaar to do a whole lot of other things, including our DigiLocker, including your M-Parivahan, and a variety of government services that state governments are competing to innovate to provide to the citizens. And this is something in which India leads the world. we have something called the account aggregator. I don't know if any of you know about this. If you don't, you should please find out. The financial activity of an entity, a small company, say example. How much money it borrows from whom? How much money it repays, pays as interest and as pays back as principal. How much sales it has, how much raw material purchases it has, how much input tax credit it claims, how much GST it pays. All this data can be compiled instantly with the permission of the company at one place, that is operating the consent layer of the company, and presented to a would-be lender to give him a financial picture of this company far more current, far more credible than the annual report of the company that is 13 months back. This capacity India has, which today, if the government has a will, can be used to do concurrent audits to ensure these bank frauds that we are so familiar with never takes place. It requires a systemic integrity and leadership to operationalize this consent layer into concurrent audit. It is possible. So India has many things which are good for it, which can take it forward. At the same time, as you said, let's not pat ourselves on the back. There are many things which are a problem for us. Culturally, we are used to the idea that knowledge is finite. We are actually anti-progress, anti-science. I come from Kerala. A far more illustrious predecessor from Kerala is Shankara, who spread Advaita around the country. Shankara was given the title Sarvajna, he who knew everything. But this was our concept, that knowledge is finite, that it is possible for one individual to gather all the knowledge of the world and possess it. This is a cultural obstacle which chains us from preventing us from innovating. Today we know knowledge keeps on expanding. Every child in the United States is told to do something new, to find something new. The classrooms encourage inquiry, encourage questioning authority, whereas we do just the opposite. If a student asks too many questions, the teacher will say, shut up, you are disrupting the class. We need to have a cultural change in the way you view knowledge. Knowledge is infinite, it keeps expanding, and you have to spend money to advance that knowledge. As he said, we spend barely 0.7% of GDP on R&D. Korea spends 4%, 5%. A company like Huawei spends 20% of its revenues on R&D. And in India, there is no company which spends more than 2% of its revenue on R&D. This cannot take us forward. We need to spend more money on R&D, and we need to innovate in fundamental sciences, which also the point you make in.
Correct.
That you must do fundamental research. Only then you'll be able to do applications and
Applied
technology.
research. In fact, just yesterday in Delhi, one of the reasons I wasn't able to come yesterday here, I was at a summit where Mr. N. Chandrasekharan was speaking, who's the chairman of Tata, of the Tata Group. And I posed to him exactly this question. I said, why is it that despite being a large conglomerate with a big balance sheet, why is the Tata Group not spending more on R&D? I can understand if a cash-strapped SME in India or even a mid-cap company in India is not spending on that. But as one of the global conglomerates out of India, why is the Tata Group not spending more on R&D? And he acknowledged that it has been one of their big mistakes in the last 2 decades. And he said just in his last summit in December with all of their Tata Group CEOs, he said that greater R&D spend has to be in the top 3 priorities of the Tata Group across companies. And so I pushed him further and I said, why has it not been historically? And his view was that unfortunately the mindset has been, and this maybe goes back to the cultural issue you were describing, sometimes it's just a cultural or a belief mindset that Indian private sector companies have never believed R&D to be a way of getting more profits. They see it as an expense item. Whereas if you look at Taiwanese companies, Korean companies, examples like Huawei from China, or you look at obviously the US companies, which are often at the vanguard of R&D, they spend 10 to 15% of their revenues on R&D. Their cultural mindset is that unless we do R&D, we will not have actually any moat around our business. And if we don't have any moat around our business, we will not have any profits. And I think that cultural mindset must change. And it has to happen in the Indian private sector. The government, unfortunately, and I tried digging there also, whether the government should be driving this, because often if you look at the examples of Taiwan, Korea, countries like that, it's cited that it was the governments of these countries that made the big push. You'll often hear the example of DARPA being cited in the US, saying that it was actually the defense departments of the US government that spent big money, but that's actually not right. While those examples are often cited, it has been the private sector that has led 70% of that, 80% of that spend, and today in the US, it's probably 90%, right? And I think that if we can change in India, I think that really will be a game changer for Indian technology and Indian companies across sectors, whether in pharma, biotech, agriculture, fertilizer. You take any industry, I think. If we have companies that start doing more R&D, 3 to 5 to 7% of their revenues into R&D, and we have great talent again, who can do the research.
Yeah.
We have the labs also. We have partnership with today access to labs globally that we can get access to because of our geopolitical position today, favorable one. So I think it's actually ours for the taking, but this mindset change has to happen.
Yeah. So, plus the colonial experience played a role in this. When the British set up universities in India, these universities were meant to teach. They were not meant to produce knowledge. Whereas universities in Europe, in Britain itself, they are primarily knowledge producing entities. Their primacy is given to research. When the government spends money on R&D in the US, it's not just in defense and applied fields. It is basically in the universities, the grants they give to the universities. The touch screen that we always associate with telecom companies, innovators like Apple, it was developed in a US university. Only the final adaptation to a phone was done by Apple. So, unless we spend money in universities and convert them into hubs of innovation, new thought, new research, and new ideas, you will not take this country forward. And see, we have the Indian Space Research Organization, where people are paid a fraction of what these people would earn were they be to work in the private sector. Still staying put in their nose to the grind and developing successfully whatever they want to develop. We have an atomic research program which somehow is badly underfunded, and the thorium-based fast breeder reactors that India is in a position to use to lead the world in fast breeder based nuclear reactors is being underfunded. So the government needs to fund more basically, and on that the private sector will come forward to supplement. And this is what has happened in Korea, this is what happened in Japan, this is what's happening in China. And as he said, unless we do this, we face an existential threat. It's not just a question of losing economic competitiveness. We will be subjugated by hostile powers. We'll be under their thumb. And this is not something India wants. India has tried to maintain its strategic autonomy right after independence. And this is something we cannot forfeit. And as you said, we must build on our strengths, but we must build more. You mentioned, apart from digital technologies, biotech. Would you like to think more on what are the challenges there?
Yes. So many of us have heard of Digital India, Startup India, Digital India, etc. And I'll just come to the biotech piece, but I'll mention one point to contextualize why biotech is also important. So I think, as you might have gathered from some of the things I've mentioned, I believe that one of the mistakes India has made is that with each successive tech wave that has come in the world, we have been a bit too late to catch it. Sometimes we are late by 5-10 years, sometimes we've been late by 30 years. If you look at semiconductors, for example, today you'll see the topic of semiconductors on every front page of every newspaper, every magazine, etc. India has launched a semiconductor mission today. In the 80s, India started on a semiconductor program, right? Some of you might know, in Mohali. Unfortunately, it didn't quite go where it could have or should have that time. And 30 years later now, 40 years later, we are now trying to catch up on semiconductors. Now, when it comes to biotech, why we didn't actually build on it, there are several reasons. Once you talk to people who were involved in it at that time. But the reason I bring that up is that it's very important for us to not just focus on waves that we can see right now in front of us, tech waves. The consumer internet tech wave, for example, we've been seeing, but the basis of that consumer tech wave was laid 20, 25 years ago. Today, we start focusing, like sometimes Europe is and sometimes India has almost thought about doing, of building our own Facebooks, our own Twitters. We are again trying to catch the tail of a wave. Whereas we need to be leaders in a wave. And that's why it's important to think about technologies that are not the mainstream today. So biotech, to your question, is actually one of those sectors or one of those waves of technology where massive exponential developments are happening. How many people in this room have heard of CRISPR? CRISPR. Genetic engineering technology. So maybe like I think 10-15% of the room. 100% of this room should have known about CRISPR by now. Really. 100% of you know about Facebook and Twitter, but that's an old game now. Right? Today, CRISPR basically refers to genetic engineering technology that's allowing researchers to genetically edit parts of the human genome. Now, there are ethical issues also that are being tackled on this front, right? But the top researcher Nobel Prize was given, I believe, in 2020 to Jennifer Doudna. I believe she's at Stanford, I believe. Now, this CRISPR technology, we tend to think, okay, maybe it's genetically editing babies. And we'll immediately shut off saying, no, that's something we don't want to do. But actually, some of the greater applications of genetic editing are happening in agriculture. China, again, is one of the leaders in biotech. Unfortunately, we talk about China only in the context of India-China border wars. But we don't talk about what that country has been doing well. They've understood, and we must learn from this. They've understood when a new wave is developing, and then they put R&D dollars behind it. They put best research scientists, often brought from abroad as well as domestically, to do great research. Now, on CRISPR and related technologies today, the Chinese have more patents than the Americans, even though the technology was developed in the US. Now, I mention all of this because in India, there is no startups basis this. There is only, I think, one department in Delhi, BIRAC, under the Department of Science and Technology, that's doing good work in this, but other than that, it's nowhere to be found. And the applications of biotechnology and genetic technologies are going to be immense. When it comes to life sciences, healthcare, agriculture, the resistance of agriculture to various diseases, etc. Unfortunately, in India, we don't even allow research on these fronts. Yeah. We have banned research in genetic editing. Yeah. So when you have banned research, how do you ever expect to come up with good applications of the technology? Yeah. Right? So I think biotech I mentioned in the latter part of my book as part of my argument that we must look at the waves that are coming in the future, and 10 years before that wave becomes mainstream, we must have a lot of scientists working on it, institutions working on it, startups working on it, universities working on it, government putting in enabling policy, and so on and so forth, so that 10 years from now, we are actually a leader in that wave and not trying to catch the wave.
Yeah. And technologies reinforce each other.
That's right. That's
so
right.
Recently, last July, we had this report about a Google subsidiary in London called DeepMind. They released for public consumption a database of 320 million protein shapes. DeepMind is an artificial intelligence powerhouse. So it is a success in artificial intelligence which allowed this company to forecast the shapes of proteins. Everything, the virus has a protein. Most of our hormones are proteins. Our body proteins are of course proteins. Amino acids are proteins. These proteins are not just, they don't just have chemical compositions. The molecules have shapes. The way a protein folds is very key to understanding how it will actually operate in the real world. And predicting the shape of a protein has been extremely complicated. It could not be predicted because you basically had to experimentally analyze this using crystallography. Now this deep mind has forecast the shapes of 320 million proteins. It is available as a searchable database for biotechnology companies around the world to decipher and find uses for them. And there is a great opportunity that is awaiting biotechnology around the world, including in India. And this is an example of how one technology helps propel another technology forward.
Absolutely.
And you also mentioned climate change, climate tech in your book. Will you please say on that?
Yeah, so climate tech is similarly, I think in the same lines as biotech, is actually a great example of what you also just mentioned, Mr. Arun, which is how technologies build upon each other. So climate technology today is a broad umbrella term being used to cover any kind of technologies that are helping address the issues of climate change or climate related emissions, right? As many of you will have now seen that this topic is becoming mainstream. We are realizing that climate crisis is not a thing of the future, but we are very much now living through the impact of it day in, day out in India and in other countries. Now what's happening is, interestingly, you would have heard of obviously solar panels and the solar revolution, as it's being called even in India. We are now one of the large solar developer countries. We have a large chunk of our energy coming from solar plants. But what we fail to appreciate is that 2 points I'll make there. One is, most of these solar plants, many of you will know, are actually not being made in India, are being made in our neighbor up north. So for the last 2 years, 3 years, since we've been in this geopolitical battle with them, we have not imported solar panels from China. As a result, our rooftop solar program, which is a big part of India's own plans for solar adoption, has been literally suffering. And it's going to take at least another 2-3 years before we can develop some kind of indigenous capabilities in it, so that we can actually now push our rooftop solar program as well. Now, why do I mention this? Because solar technologies or solar panels, solar PVs, are part of a broader range of climate technologies that are becoming as crucial or as critical for countries as oil has been. Because the energy of the future now might not be oil, it will be technologies like solar, possibly green hydrogen, nuclear as you mentioned, and so on and so forth. And unless we realize that in 10 years from now, this shift will be so fast, 10 years later, we might realize that we are dependent on a whole range of technologies that are coming from countries that are not necessarily our friends. Many of the ingredients or the raw materials being used in solar panels, for example, or EV batteries, what are called rare earth materials, China happens to be the largest reserve holder of these rare earth materials. They're going into semiconductors, they're going into your EV batteries, your solar panels, and so on and so forth. So unless you think strategically about a whole range of climate technologies around carbon capture, carbon sequestration, you think about smart grid technology, because now your grids also have to change. Unfortunately, in India today, we are living under an electricity grid system that can only be categorized as 1G, if I was to use the telecom analog. Whereas the world is moving to 4G and 5G. Our grid and the quality of the power grid is 1G. It's today only equipped to take power being generated centrally and being thrown out everywhere. But now with solar coming in and everyone becoming a possible producer themselves, if you have rooftop panels on your roof, for example, you need a decentralized grid where everyone is providing power into the system as well and taking. This kind of decentralized smart grids, which 5G technology is, by the way, helping build, is nowhere on the horizon in India. So what we'll realize is 10 years later, we are buying this technology from either Chinese companies or American or European. And then we'll worry about the security of our power grid because it'll all be European companies or Americans, right? So climate technology is yet another example where I believe India must look ahead and beyond just solar panels and EV. That's been the focus of the conversation so far. There's a whole range of other technologies under this umbrella that today our planners, both in the private sector and public sector, must be thinking about and preparing for. So all of these are examples of waves that we need to be
Yeah.
catching early, not late.
Yeah. But again, it's not just technology. It's how we use technology, how we view technology. And climate technology is a good example. The 6th assessment report of the UN panel on climate change, it had this striking number. The carbon budget available to prevent the world temperature rising 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels is only 500 gigatons. 500 gigatons is the carbon that will be spewed by 10 years growth. There is no way reducing emissions will contain additional carbon generated to 500 gigatons. The only way this disaster can be prevented is by sucking carbon dioxide out of the air. The reason why this is not commonly discussed is that this will put the onus on the rich countries which had put that carbon into the atmosphere in the first place. It is for us, countries like India, to be strategic about the solution and the technology. This is why carbon dioxide removal is the most crucial technology in climate right now. You said carbon sequestration and usage. There are certain universities in the US which actually have managed to at Canada to capture carbon dioxide from the air and convert it into carbon fiber and ammonia. This is being done through chemistry and biotechnology. Lawrence Livermore lab in the US, it actually produced alcohol and carbon. It is possible to, after with carbon dioxide capture from the atmosphere. This is again being done by biotech. And this is cutting edge technology which Indians should be mastering. We should be funding startups in these kind of areas and not just going after unicorns. I'm happy that you wrote this in your book, that our showering attention on unicorns at the expense of more deserving companies elsewhere in the sector is doing great damage to our entire development ecosystem.
Yeah, and I'll add one more point, and I know I think we'll have to be mindful of the time also, but I'll add one other thing. All the conversation on technology, and towards the end of the book I do say this, I think ultimately I don't believe that technology is the solution for everything also. Right? Much like behavioral change is equally important, cultural values change or emphasis on better values is as important. There's another piece which I've been thinking a lot more about, which is that I think when it comes to some of these climate related technologies, for example, cooling is a big energy consumption area, right? And as India becomes hotter and hotter, our cooling requirements are going up as we have more and more buildings that's going up. But we have to sometimes turn back to our traditional wisdom that is deep in our country, everywhere you go, for coming up with better systems of cooling, for example. We don't have to always follow where Western technology has gone in terms of cooling. We actually have had a lot of examples in our villages, our smaller sort of towns of building materials and building methods that have inherently been made sure that the houses were cooler, right? And I think if we have more startups that leverage some of that traditional wisdom, combine it with technology, I think then that again can be a very good formula for Indian startups to offer technology that an American startup or a European startup is not well placed to develop.
Sir, with your permission, I would like to open the floor for the audiences to ask any questions if they want. We have hardly 5 minutes to spare with us, so just 1 or 2 questions. Okay. It's on, sir.
एक दो पॉइंट जो आपने उठाए हैं टेक्नोलॉजी। मैं प्रभात तिवारी हूँ। यहाँ पर मैं डायरेक्टर हूँ।
Blue Monde Kala Photography.
आप आज के दिन में देखेंगे अगर बैंगलोर में काफ़ी लैब्स में डिज़ाइनर्स बैठे हैं, टेक्नोलॉजी वाले डिज़ाइनर्स, लेकिन वो डिज़ाइन कर रहे हैं क्वालकॉम के लिए। उसका आईपी जो बन रहा है उस डिज़ाइन के बेसिस पे वो क्वालकॉम के नाम पे जा रहा है पैटेंट। तो हमें ये चेंज करना है कि अपनी इंडियन कंपनीज अपना टेक्नोलॉजी डिज़ाइन करके इंडिया में आईपी सिस्टम बेटर करके यहाँ पे रजिस्टर करें। आई थिंक वो बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट।
Okay, thank you. Next question, please.
So I
Sir, please not a discussion. मैं चाहूँगा वन बाय वन सब सवाल पूछें.
My name is Nilab. My question, this idea about geopolitical leadership through technology is a common one. But now we are kind of back to this idea of not so much globalization and perhaps the whole reverse of it. So how does this play out? What's your view on that?
That's absolutely right. I think that
Historically, context, I get it, but
correct. No,
looking forward.
The fear today is that the world might actually deglobalize in a way, especially from the standpoint of the US, which is trying to think very heavily about what they call reshoring. But I think that it's up to the other countries who are friends of the US today to talk less about reshoring in the US and friendshoring. So to the extent that the geopolitical battle between the US and China has caused them to think about decoupling from China, it should not mean that they should decouple with the rest of the world. It's equally important for them to say कि आज हम सारा कुछ खुद नहीं करना शुरू करेंगे, हम चाइना की जगह अपने और जो दोस्त हैं हमारे, चाहे वो इंडिया हुआ, ताइवान हुआ, कोरिया हुआ, यूके हुआ, जहाँ भी हुआ, आई थिंक टू द एक्सटेंट दैट द यूएस थिंक्स ऑफ फ्रेंड शोरिंग, जो टर्म उन्होंने यूज़ करी है, इंस्टेड ऑफ रीशोरिंग, जो कह रहा है कि सब कुछ हम वापस ले आएंगे, अगर वो हुआ, फ्रेंड शोरिंग हुआ, तो आई थिंक ग्लोबलाइजेशन विल कंटिन्यू. बट येस, देयर इज अ रियल रिस्क कि प्रोटेक्शनिज्म एंड नेशनलिज्म इन इकोनॉमिक strategies could lead to a world where India does not have the ability to benefit from globalized trade, etc. So वो risk real है.
Last question. I am Shailendra Tiwari. I am retired general manager from BHEL and basically a power engineer. At this point of time when energy transition is going on and hydrogen and the nuclear, they are at the center of it, and we are very well placed on the nuclear technologies. If we go for an SMR hydrogen and we can get into the energy transition and pack this energy into the hydrogen molecule and export it, I think we are able to win this race.
Absolutely, sir. SMR I think is definitely a part of that solution, for sure.
Sir, just one last question. The elderly gentleman has been waiting since long.
JP Sharma, retired force officer. In Maharashtra, a farmer raised teak plants by procuring from a company raised genetically. A few teak plants became climbers. So there may be such fear in human babies also. What will happen then? How we can accept the genetically modified babies?
So देखिए, every technology has an element that you have to be afraid of. Going back to cars, गाड़ियाँ भी मारते हैं लोगों को, न्यूक्लियर प्लांट भी मारते हैं लोगों को, हम भोपाल में बैठे हैं, right? There have been industrial disasters also. So I think that the negative applications or the application of technology that we don't want, we must manage and control for that. But we must not say कि हम बाकी जो positive applications हो सकते हैं उसके उसमें हम research ही नहीं करेंगे. Just because a Western company does what it does with its seed vis-a-vis our farmers doesn't mean that tomorrow there's not a different model of doing genetic research that allows the farmer to still be in charge of propagating that seed on his own next time, ताकि वो perennially dependent नहीं हो रहा किसी large conglomerate पे. तो I just believe कि आप research करिए, वो जो alternative business models आपको करने हैं वो आप evolve करिए, but just because there's some negative implication of some technology ये मत कहिए कि हम तो करेंगे ही नहीं, क्योंकि होगा फिर यही. जब हमने colonial era में भी देखी है, there was a time when land-based empires in India said हमने तो global oceanic trade करना ही नहीं है, और देखिए उसका implication क्या हुआ. 300 साल तक हमने गुलामी करी. So we just have to be open to the positive applications, not block technology.
And if we didn't have genetic change, there would be no humans. We would still be monkeys.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anirudh ji, and thank you so much, T N Arun ji. जोरदार तालियां होनी चाहिए उनके लिए. मैं मेहता जी को बुलाना चाहूँगा on behalf of the Society for Culture and Environment कि वो आगे आए और हमारे author और हमारे discussion को memento के साथ सम्मानित करें. This memento is the mascot of the Bhopal Literature and Art Festival, dear ladies and gentlemen. There it is. So मैं हमारे author और discussion का भी ध्यान केंद्रित करना चाहूँगा that this picture is the picture of a highly endangered bird called lesser florican, which is captured by Padma Shri Bhalu Mondi ji, and yes, Anirudh ji के लिए memento, and then followed by Mr. T K Arun ji for moderating this session in such a wonderful way. And of course it was and indeed a technical journey for all of us, presented to us by Anirudh Suri ji. I would request Anirudh ji to please